Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I basically wanted to put my thoughts out there about Carrie Fisher, the life of Carrie Fisher, and the passing of her. As of the time of this recording, she passed away yesterday, just days after suffering a massive heart attack on a flight, and it was something that gave me tremendous pause when I first heard that she had had this heart attack, and she had been apparently unconscious for like 10 minutes, not breathing, and they just barely resuscitated her. And I was reminded very much, it hit close to home because for those who are unaware, my dad actually died after suffering a massive heart attack. Only it was hours after he had suffered it that he passed away. For Carrie Fisher, it was just a matter of days, but I was utmost fearful, even in the wake of hearing conflicting reports that she was stable and doing a little better and everything like that. I was still very much fearful that 2016 would see to her end. And when that news came to me yesterday, it just rendered me speechless because she was such an iconic figure in my life, in the lives of so many people like me who grew up in the late 70s, all through the 80s, through the 90s. Star Wars was one of my earliest influences. I've shared many a post and many a picture over on my Facebook page, especially in the renaissance of Star Wars with The Force Awakens and now Rogue One, of me as a kid in C-3PO and R2-D2 pajamas, having a Star Wars pillowcase, which I still actually have from childhood. Star Wars T-shirts. One of my first ever action figure collectibles was a Kenner C-3PO from 1977 and things of that sort. I have early memories of pretending after countless watchings of A New Hope, the original Star Wars film. My dad had recorded it off HBO in the early 80s. And, I would enact these sort of imaginative scenarios where first I'm Darth Vader and I'm trying to implore my mother to pretend that she is, Princess Leia who has been captured. And then I would switch roles and I would be Luke Skywalker and have, either my father or my mother then switch roles and play Vader. And I would be the hero coming to save the princess. But I think one of the things that most, made her fall into the hearts and minds of so many, become an obsession for so many as a character, was Carrie Fisher's strength in her portrayal. I mean, I've heard interviews over the years where she said, I am not Princess Leia, I just happen to look like her. But without Carrie Fisher, without that person, without all of the things that she experienced in her life, all the things that were going on, she would later become an advocate for mental illness awareness because of her own bipolar disorder. She would become an advocate against addiction because of the addiction she suffered. She wrote a book which became a movie about this subject. Without the strength of will of the actress, I don't think the character of Princess Leia would have become so indelible to the hearts and minds of popular culture and just be so beloved by so many fanboys like me, fanboys and fangirls. She had a strength of will in her character. I mean, in A New Hope, the first scene of the movie, she stands toe-to-toe with Darth Vader, and she never backs down. She also trades sparring insults with Peter Cushing's Grand Moff Tarkin. She never lost her sense of femininity. She never had to become an action hero in order to be so impressive with her strength of will. And I think generations will continue to be, as they have been in the past, influenced by her portrayal, without which, without her as a person, without Carrie Fisher as a human being, I don't think it would have been as unforgettable and moving. As her character, as her portrayal would evolve into The Empire Strikes Back, did we see sort of a softening of those hard edges in the relationship, the back and forth give and sway that was going on between the character of Leia and Han Solo, Harrison Ford's character respectively, and when she professes her love for him, it is in no way her giving under, the empowerment of the man in the relationship or anything like that. She's coming to grips and coming to terms with her own inner fears and desires and her own love. So no more befitting a sort of romantic pairing has ever been found, I think, in fiction, in the fictional medium, than Princess Leia and Han Solo. No more memorable or affecting a pairing, a duo. And that's by and large in part because of Carrie Fisher and who she was and the way she portrayed that character. Moving on into Return of the Jedi, I mean, speaking of her strength of will, in the kidnapping, the eschewing away by Boba Fett of Han Solo in the Carbonite as we end Empire Strikes Back, do we find an emboldened Leia who, because of how much she loves this man, is willing to go into disguise and become part of a splinter cell to insinuate itself inside Jabba the Hutt's palace, this gangster, this very fearsome character. And yet she never bats an eye, even when she is captured. And she is enslaved for all intents and purposes. I use air quotes because she's never enslaved. They'll put her in the gold bikini and she'll be in chains and irons at, the behest of this giant blob, Jabba. But her will never breaks. She never gives in. The strength of her character is utmost paramount to every scene that she's in. And she is so goddamn sexy. And her sexiness, the hotness coming off of her character is because you see that strength of will. She will not be bent to the will of anyone. She doesn't have to become in any way masculine, in any way an action hero for you to see that. She doesn't have to blow things up, and eventually she'll turn on Jabba and use those slave chains against him to take him out. In my formative teenage years, I was obsessed with the, air quotes, slave Leia iconography. So much so that in middle school, during a particularly tumultuous time of my life, I spent a lot of time in the library because I hated the school I was in. I hated the hierarchy of the faculty and, being bullied and all this kind of stuff. I was, at one point brought to contemplating suicide. It was so terrible and horrible. Eventually, I would be transferred to a much better school, but I started to, this is befitting of the topic, I started to rebel against the school that I was in. I started to do semi-criminalistic things, and, one of those acts was to be in the library one day and seeing a book about Star Wars that had a page-size poster from the Return of the Jedi. And there, if you've ever seen the poster I'm speaking of, was Princess Leia in the slave Leia attire, front and center. And I, in my formative, puberty-laden teenage years, was so turned on by that, I had to have it. I stole the book. Eventually, would I actually return the book? But sans that page. And the only reason I admit this now, in a video that's supposed to be a remembrance of Carrie Fisher, who had many roles other than Princess Leia. She was the enigmatic, murderous woman in the Blues Brothers who was trying to blow up Jake Blues, her former fiancé, left at the altar, She was in When Harry Met Sally. She was in The Burbs. She was in so many movies. And this isn't to discount her lifetime of work by just focusing on this one character in any way, shape, or form. But she was so indelible to my mind as a young growing man, Later would she speak very frankly, very off the cuff, very sort of with a snarky sense of humor about being forced to lose weight, to even portray that character, even going back to A New Hope, before she ever wore a gold bikini. She would be sent to a fat farm, and she would be very frank and open about that whole Hollywood mentality of what beauty is, what it equates to. She would be very frank about her own mental illness and her own, dealings with addiction and all these kinds of things. The relationship with she and her mother, Debbie Reynolds, who I'm also a big time fan of, going back to Singing in the Rain. She very much shot from the hip. She was a no, holds barred, brass tacks kind of lady. And that is why the woman, the actress, the performer, the person, the human being, Carrie Fisher, more than any character, any fictional portrayal she could ever put out there, put forth in our lives, meant that much more to us because she was so frank. And I mean, there was an interview a friend of mine shared over on Facebook where after The Force Awakens, I think it's the Graham Norton show, she's talking to Daisy Ridley about how she met a fan one day, and this fan basically, signified to her that she was his masturbatory fantasy for many years. And she basically turns to Daisy Ridley and says, "This is what you have to look forward to." This was the kind of woman Carrie Fisher was. It gave me a hell of a laugh because she was so frank. She was so real. She was so balls out, as far as the truth. Because, she had such a refreshing approach after so many years of being encapsulated, being tight-lipped. For so much of her early formative years, while she was going through these things, of course, you don't think about screaming out, about speaking out, about saying something about it. But she came along to the point, she evolved to the point where suddenly she had that freedom. She could be frank with herself because it was something, there's a level of fear. I've spoken about to some people making videos. There are certain videos I make where it's like, well, I don't know if I should ever really do that. Well, then do it. Confront the fear. Speak out. Say the thing you want to say. And I'll admit, I found her incredibly, incredibly intoxicatingly attractive through the course of the Star Wars trilogy. Through my puberty-laden years, I can't deny it. And there was nothing more satisfying than being in the theater during The Force Awakens and seeing her reprising that role, and the embrace between she and Harrison Ford's Han Solo on screen melted my heart. It made me gasp in my throat. It was so satisfying. Something I had yearned to actually see on screen for so many years was finally there before me, and then to see her subsequent crashing under the weight of the loss of him was very much how I felt hearing the news of her passing. She literally, physically, as General Leia, in the Resistance movement, she can sense, because of her Force sensitivity, his loss, and she just practically collapses. And that's very much how I felt about her own passing, because of how much time in my life I've spent with versions of her. Through Star Wars, through all those other movies, I've never read any of her books, but I've actually for a long time wanted to get to know her perspectives on things. But you could get her perspective on things through interviews because she was so free with herself, with her thoughts and emotions and, everything she experienced in her life. It was just an incredible down note that I expressed over on Facebook. I was just so grateful that if this had to be, at the very least, it didn't happen. It happened the day after my birthday and 2 days after Christmas, because Christmas and my birthday, my birthday is the day after Christmas, has been the happiest I've been in a very long time. And the crushing blow of learning of her loss was just, I'm just glad that it came after all of that joy, and that she lived long enough to see how much she really meant to so many. And she will most definitely wholeheartedly be missed. It's really all I can say. So yeah, be grateful. Just be grateful for the life you have, the people you have around you. Never take a moment for granted, because you never know. You just never know when it'll all come crashing down, come to an end. And to Carrie Fisher, wherever you are, all my best and my greatest of thanks for just being a part of so many of our lives. Rest in peace.